The story so far. South Africa did the genomic sequencing of a new coronavirus variant, and then we were paid lip service in the form of empty praise, while the world's superpowers turned their backs on us, partly in the form of the UK putting us back on a travel ban list, out of which our scientists had argued us some weeks earlier, because the first time that they placed us there, we were placed longer than was scientifically sensible. We got angry about being placed back on that list, especially since we weren't consulted about it, after we had already established what we thought was a collaborative relationship the first time we were arguing ourselves out of that list. You know, that time when we were right and they were wrong. And so we complained about how we were being punished for our good work and for remaining transparent so that we can alert the world to the new variant we had just discovered. The variant which would come to be known as Omicron. Then a US politician thought that South Africans were rushing through their southern border to spread Omicron inside their country. Because geography is un-American? In fact, as we're all aware, communism is when you know about the two entire hemispheres that are separated along the Greenwich Meridian, not to be confused with Greenwich, Connecticut, suggesting the United States of America is not the center of the world. It does cut through London though, of course, which makes the UK pretty close to that designation. So what's going on over there? Well, the UK Minister of Health in Parliament claimed that the UK is the one that alerted the world to Omicron.
And there is no country in the world that is better at surveillance of those variants. May I remind the honourable gentleman that it was the UK that alerted the world to the threat of Omicron.
But, of course, what had actually happened is that, again, we, South Africa, did the alerting. And I remember this because after we did, a Spanish newspaper drew this cartoon for our troubles. And then the UK put us on a red list, only to then claim their very same achievement that they earlier punished. That's adding insult to injury, man. Although, because they set a precedent of hostility towards transparency, once they took up the claim that they were the ones that alerted the world to Omicron, the world responded in accordance to the UK's own example. Specifically, I'm talking about the fact that France went ahead and put the UK on a red list. Following this, I kid you not, the UK complained that France was punishing them for their good science and transparency. What? I apologize, that was rather erratic of me. That won't happen again. So, part of the argument that African countries made was that being placed on red list was not a scientifically sound decision at the time, and that it was more politically motivated than anything else. And I mean, the UK was experiencing some political turbulence. It was a rough week out there, to say the least. There were a lot of things happening, so there was quite a bit of commotion. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was around the time when Boris Johnson was supposed to give a speech to business leaders, and he lost his place in the speech, which is fine. It happens all the time. That's not news. The news is how he then saved himself with this quintessential jewel of English sophistication.
Hands up anyone who's been to Peppa Pig World. Not enough. I was a bit hazy what I would find at Peppa Pig World, but I loved it. And Peppa Pig World is very much my kind of place. It has very safe streets, discipline in schools, heavy emphasis on new mass transit systems, I notice, even if they're a bit stereotypical about Daddy Pig. But the real lesson for me, going to Peppa Pig World, and I'm surprised you haven't been there, was about the power of UK creativity. Who would have believed, Tony, that a pig that looks like a hairdryer, or possibly a sort of Picasso-like hairdryer.
In your speech to the CBI, you lost your notes, you lost your place, you went off on a tangent about Peppa Pig. Frankly, is everything okay?
I think that people got the vast majority of the points I wanted to make, and I thought it went over well.
Yeah, we might have to liberate the English language from the British. If you're ever feeling a little reckless and you want to trigger an auto-existential crisis, please consider the proposition that your existence is the exact same amount of real as the fact that Boris Johnson lost his place in a speech to business leaders and his first panicked instinct was to pivot to Peppa Pig.
Peppa Pig world is very much my kind of place.
Anyway, fast forward to 2022, which many are predicting will be 2022, which is kind of an uncanny prediction when you think about the fact that in both those years, there was threat of World War III within the first quarter. A bombshell in English politics sets off when allegations come out that the Prime Minister was having parties with his fellow colleagues in government, while the rest of the country was in lockdown. And allegations that when challenged on the issue, he subsequently lied about it to Parliament. And it became a little bit more than just allegations when a truncated report of an investigation into the matter found that there were failures of leadership in the whole Partygate affair. So, do you suppose that this kind of government was careful with their COVID policy, especially when political convenience provided opportunity to do otherwise? You can suppose that if you like, but there is significant evidence to the contrary. This is part of the reason why we need to champion science in South Africa and Africa at large. There is, even if sometimes tacit and tangential, always some degree of vindication. It is a great knowledge acquiring tool that we have to use to our benefit and to the benefit of the world, of course, instead of allowing ourselves constantly to be abusively taken advantage of in its name. These other guys already know how important it is. Britain is gearing up to start a robust new science department. They know the importance. It's just that it's problematic when other people are doing it to their political inconvenience. Or in the case of other European countries, when others are doing it in a way that hurts their bottom line. Meanwhile, Germany, as I pointed out in another video, was against waiving patents for developing countries such as our own. This is the same Germany that pledged over $1 billion to Namibia. Well, actually, the first offer was much lower than that. But anyway, eventually, they pledged over $1 billion to Namibia in acknowledgement of the genocide that they perpetrated there. The same Germany that we as South Africans cited as a good example when we were banning our apartheid flag, except in certain specific circumstances, because they had banned the Nazi flag. That Germany is the one that revealed itself to be willing to fight the pandemic, so long as that doesn't mess with their patents. I mean, one of their arguments was that nobody had taken advantage of Moderna's pledge not to prosecute anybody who infringes on their patent. Which is not exactly the same as giving out the technology, by the way. And so to them, it meant that nobody in the developing world had the expertise to do it. Which then meant that the issue of waiving patents was not actually where the problem lied. Or so they lied. Because as of this very month, South African scientists cloned the Moderna vaccine. Which means there was never really a reason for them not to share the information due to threat of there not being any expertise on this side of the equator. No. Germany prefers to be one of the barriers to Africa's response against the virus, and then only to pay us much later to say that they're sorry. Because when it comes to protecting some of their interests, these powerful countries believe it's better to apologize much later than to ask for permission. Or whatever the equivalent of that latter part is in this case. They are happy enough to do decolonization in the form of being an ATM to passive recipients. Passive in terms of the mechanics of the transaction itself, not because of how the money will be used, which has been earmarked for development. They're happy enough to be the ATM, but not to share the technology behind part of their money-making capacities themselves. If you were ever in doubt, and I don't suspect you were, this is a clear example that there is a way of misusing decolonization and social justice, especially when these countries are the ones that are setting the international agenda for how those concepts ought to materialize. To us, those who were colonized. And I'm not trying to say that, for instance, South Africa is entirely politically sane or anything like that. Yeah, our shortcomings are well documented and they follow us. But enough apologies about this, okay? But we are the ones that have to constantly be apologetic, qualifying every one of our achievements with the fact that, oh yeah, we know we have problems, blah, blah, blah. We are the ones that get penalized when we even do the correct scientific practices during a pandemic. While these other countries get to skirt their responsibilities when it comes to their, quite frankly, anti-scientific practices during, again, a global pandemic. And why? Because of their political and economic status above our own. Anyway, back to Boris Johnson. He got yelled at by members of his own party, to the point where some even asked him to resign.
But I expect my leaders to shoulder the responsibility for the actions they take. Yesterday, he did the opposite of that. So I'll remind him of a quotation altogether too familiar to him of Leo Amery to Neville Chamberlain. You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
He might survive all of this, of course. The man has a solid track record of failing up. But this whole situation is a definite blow to his credibility, and to the credibility of his government, and to the credibility of the UK. The word of the day is science and vindication. That's 2 words. Well, whatever, we were right.
In the name of God, go.
As I sip my bush tea. By the way, I just wanted to say kudos to Germany for at least acknowledging their genocide and attempting to do something. I suppose we have to start somewhere. And it could definitely be worse. They could be silent about their history like some other countries. Or they could be like Belgium, who only send deepest regrets from the king, while his brother, the prince, actively defends King Leopold's rule over Congo by saying, and get this, by saying that Leopold never visited Congo and tortured anybody personally. Therefore, he's off the hook. He can't be blamed. Never visited personally, therefore absent of blame. It's actually quite a common defense, more common than I actually initially realized. It's a defense which relinquishes a person of any important responsibilities over the things which belong to that person's name, while also not removing any of the benefits that that person gets from that form of ownership. Or Germany could have been like the UK, where they elected a prime minister who has gone on record as saying Africa should be recolonized. So perhaps we should grade Germany on a curve here. What do you think? Feel free, of course, as always, to consider these issues in your own capacity and figure some of this stuff out for yourself.